In this video, we're going to talk about how tonic herbs were discovered and the overall worldview that it came out of, and how this worldview is different than the current one we have, the current model we have right now. So the discovery of tonic herbs and the classification of herbs in general in the Chinese system is credited to a guy called Shen Nong. And basically what happened was he went through all the plants and everything around him in his environment, and he tasted them, and he noticed the effects, and he classified all of them by their different energies, by their different effects, and then by the different classes. So there were three classes: the superior, the middle, and then the inferior. So superior would be the tonics, middle would be kind of the part tonic, part medicinal, and then the inferior would be, just the more medicinal herbs that are more drug-like and more intense in their effects. And also we classified all the poisons, and then classified things, by roots, by leaves, by berries, by animal parts, etc. So he is also credited with discovering tea, because he noticed he had a pot of boiling water, and then some wind was blowing, and it blew, a leaf into the water, and he thought, oh wow, I could make tea like this. And then he's credited with discovering that. Now, whether or not he realistically, historically did, it's up for debate. You and I both weren't there, so we really don't know. But basically, he's credited with discovering all of the herbs and classifying them. And I'll post a link below where you can read more about him and his story, and more of the historical, cultural significance around his life. So it's important to know that, because when you're looking at herbs, let's say you're walking through the woods, and if you see a reishi mushroom or you see cordyceps or something growing, your first thought isn't going to be, wow, that's probably really good for my lungs, or wow, that's probably really going to calm down my consciousness or help my immune system. It's not really going to be your first thought, and your first thoughts might even be like, ugh, that's kind of grossing me out, I definitely don't want to eat that. Because we're coming from a completely different paradigm, a completely different worldview. And the two worldviews are very different and basically polar opposites. Our current worldview in this modern time is very ego-based, and is coming out of more of the wood element, which is very much concerned with thinking and logic. And this is why our rule of truth is basically science, which is based on doubt, which is based on only perceiving things through the mind, which is ultimately connected to the liver, which is the wood element. And if you want to see this in a very clear way, what do trees do? They basically want to hang on to every amount of nourishment that they can. They just want to keep growing and keep expanding for as long as they possibly can. And their solution to getting more is just growing more roots, growing bigger, growing taller. And this will basically continue to the end of their life. Well, they'll grow and die and then eventually decay. And if you look at our modern culture, what do we want to do? We want to grow. We always want to grow more. We always want bigger, better. We want to keep growing and growing and growing. And everything is always coming through the mind, and we're always using science and logic to rule everything. Whereas the context that the discovery of tonic herbs and the whole practice of tonic herbalism comes out of more of a water-based element, or even earth-based elemental consciousness, which is more concerned with understanding our role in the grand cosmic scheme of things, and understanding our role in nature, and realizing that we're not the center of the universe that we think we are, that if we in fact die and go back into the ground, the earth is going to continue, the sun's going to continue, and the moon's going to continue, everything's going to continue on, even if we're not here. So we're really not as important in the grand cosmic sense as we think we are. And another thing that really distinguishes this form of consciousness, this more ancient consciousness, this more Chinese medicinal consciousness, is based on observing nature. It's based on yin and yang. It's based on the 5 elements, which is completely obvious, completely easy to understand if you're in the right frame of mind. Now, if you're in the A equals B equals C, or A squared plus B squared equals C squared, this very linear, logistical kind of consciousness, you're probably not going to see it. You need to be in more of an open-minded, right-brained, feeling, intuitive-based consciousness to be able to even understand it. But it's incredibly obvious, because what these people were doing when they were devising the system is they were using common sense, they were using logic, but they were also perceiving with their eyes and just paying attention to what's around them. So what they would do is say, okay, well, what does wood do? And they would study the element of wood, the energy of wood, and then say, okay, well, what behaves like that in the body? Okay, what does fire do? Let's study the element of fire. Okay, well, what behaves like fire in the body? And they would do that throughout the 5 elements. And they'd also say, okay, well, obviously there's night and day, there's male and female, there's hot and cold, there's all of these opposites. So they just intuited and saw commonsensically and obviously what was actually happening. So all of their insights and science and arts that came out of that were all based on observing nature and observing natural processes that are happening in nature, because they realized that fundamentally and ultimately we are a part of nature. We aren't here to control nature, we aren't here to dominate nature. Actually, it's practically the other way around. We think we control nature, we think we dominate nature, but ultimately, look at any natural disaster, look at anything, and we can see just how flimsy things really are, and just how in a second nature can basically just wipe us out completely without any warning, without us having any say in the matter whatsoever. So it's something we might want to really think about and examine when we're trying to construct a worldview and we're trying to relate to the world. And we might want to see, well, if my worldview is false, could this be causing problems? Could this be fogging my memory? Could this be harming my health? Could this be harming my relationships? We might want to examine that, and we might want to examine other ways of looking at things that are more in harmony and more essentially just true in actual pragmatic, practical value. So that's how tonic herbs were discovered, some of the background of the whole consciousness of the whole worldview that this whole practice comes out of, and how it's different from what we commonly, fall into in our usual everyday, day-to-day thought patterns. So if you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.